Welcome to the Leo Training Podcast with Joe DeLeo. You'll hear in-depth interviews and tips from world-class athletes, coaches, and industry-leading experts to help you train smarter and improve at what you love to do. Train smarter, get stronger, move better, race faster. Here's your host, Joe DeLeo.
Hi everyone, we are back with another episode. Today's guest is Dr. Steve Capobianco. In episode 14, Steve and I discuss a blend of topics focused around movement, including mobility, stability, and motor control. We also discuss the fascial system and how we are connected to it, both mechanically and neurologically. Before we roll into the show, let me tell you a little bit more about Steve. Dr. Steve Capobianco holds a BA and MA in Kinesiology and Exercise Science, in addition to a doctorate in chiropractic medicine. Steve is a practicing sports chiropractor, currently holding a Diplomate in Rehab from the ACA. In addition, he is a certified chiropractic sports practitioner and a performance enhancement specialist from the National Academy of Sports Medicine. Steve is the medical director for Rocktape, pioneering evidence-informed education development that challenges the status quo in movement learning. He authored the Fascial Movement Taping Manual and lectures worldwide on the movement-based taping technique. Steve recently launched a sports-specific rehab and performance institute called ProjectMOVE in Denver, Colorado, that focuses on identifying motor control dysfunction in an attempt to enhance human performance from the professional athlete to the weekend warrior. Without further ado, let's roll to episode 14, Project Move with Dr. Steve Capobianco. Steve Capobianco, welcome to the Leo Training Podcast. Thank you for coming on. I am super excited to have you here, and I think we're going to have some awesome material to cover this evening, and ready to get rocking and rolling, man.
Well, so am I. Thanks for having me. This is a treat. I love talking to like-minded people and hopefully like-minded followers, and hopefully we can just share some cool ideas.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think we're going to be dropping some knowledge bombs for sure.
Yeah, that seems to be the term of choice for a lot of people lately, knowledge bombs. I'm hoping I can give you some too.
Yeah, man, you will. I know it. So let's just kick things off. Let's have you talk a little bit about, your background, your entry point for those in the audience that aren't familiar with who you are and your line of work and what you do on a day-to-day basis.
It's a great question. It's morphed. I'm telling you that I've been in practice. So I'm a practicing sports chiropractor. I've been practicing chiropractic for, let's say, 13, 14 years now. But it's morphed into something else. And most people would show up at my office and they'll say, who is this guy? Because they've been referred to me from someone else saying, you need to see my guy, not referring to me as a chiropractor or as a strength and conditioning coach, a rehab specialist, but they say, you need to see this guy. And so once they recognize who I am, they just say that you just don't act like another chiropractor. And I guess that's true. I think I've melded together several things within my profession or my experience as a movement specialist. And it's a combination of sports chiropractic, move things when they need to be moved, but more as an educator. I think that's what really my passion is educating people how to get autonomy or own their own body again. And then through that education is showing them how to do that through movement. So if you can meld all those three together and make me into a chiro educator movement specialist, maybe that's what I am. So going forward, really how I've morphed into my practice is I started a company called ProjectMOVE about 2 years ago with some colleagues of mine. And our focus is just getting people to move again. And that's step one, getting them to move. And then it comes down to, if we follow the Gray Cook model of getting them to move well. And so we are on this mission of getting people to move more authentically, having ownership of their own body. And if you want to call that chiropractic, I'd say great. I want chiropractic to move in that direction, but it really is more of a movement specialist type of practice.
I love it. And I think what you're touching on there is really interesting because kind of we're at this point right now where we're starting to see everything kind of meld together in a very positive way. From chiropractic, physical therapy, strength training, and there's more and more overlap happening in the sense that, the goal is to get people to move well and then continue to build upon that, whatever their individual goal may be, whether that's strength or whether they're an endurance athlete and they're training for an event, or they're competing at, CrossFit or a specific sport. I love that you're pulling from a multidisciplinary approach.
Yeah, all in one, right? So usually you'll have a team of specialists, and I do have a great team behind me to help me implement the things that I want to do, because you want to hit a mass group of people versus just one-on-one, which I love to do. But if we can get many people moving versus just the one, that's a benefit. So I have a great team that work with me and really I learn from at the same time. But this evolution of movement specialists, and I kind of couple all of us into that group, right? Chiros, PTs, there's massage therapists that are out there that are doing some great work. The strength coaches, really, I go back to what I was initially before I got into chiropractic as a strength and conditioning and a rehab specialist. I'm originally from Canada, so there's a profession called kinesiologist, which isn't as well recognized here in the U.S., but well recognized and refined in Canada. And really, it just came down to getting people to move from a table to now owning it on the ground, and then moving from that. So I just put all those things together into a program that I think seems to be working within a 2-year process, anyways.
That's awesome, man. So let's keep it flowing here. Why don't you tell us more about ProjectMOVE, and let's start with how did it come about?
I get the opportunity to teach for this other company called Rocktape that I'll talk to you about in a second. But Rocktape brings me to many different places around the country and around the world. I get the benefit of teaching people how to put elastic therapeutic tape on their body worldwide. But I came to Denver, Colorado at least 3 or 4 times a year, and I met some really cool people that we resonated. We just clicked. We're sitting around a table at Chili's, and I know Chili's wasn't the best place for us to talk about movement, but that's where we were at, right? And we were sitting there, and before I would finish a sentence, the guy across the table would finish it for me. And those are those type of conversations that really get you intrigued about where we're going with this profession and where we're going in respect to movement. So we sat around a table and we drew out a plan saying, we need to get Capo, and Capo is my nickname, from California, where I moved from, and moved to Denver, Colorado to build this dream of all of ours. And so what we did was we put together a package of clinical experts as well as strength and conditioning experts to be able to provide the members and the clientele that we serve with the best of both worlds. And really, it's a program that starts off with screening. We screen everyone that comes into the facility are screened in respect to movement to decide where they enter into the program, so we can appropriately deliver the most effective program for that individual and what their needs are. And if they come in with pain, we can address that with our clinical team. And then if they, deliver or are exposed to any type of painful experience within the program, then we also have that team to manage it very quickly. So within that program, we have group training, we have small group training, we have one-on-one training. But the coolest thing, and I'm really proud about this, is that how it's evolved in the last year is where parents that were training how to move again said, I want my kid to be exposed to this. And think about it. Our kids, and I have a young kid, and watching the lack of experience that they get in respect to movement in their school environment is getting scary. So they wanted their kids to get exposed to this same movement laboratory. So we've really evolved into a youth performance facility where we're getting these youth athletes in our facility reteaching them how to move again before they actually participate in a sport. So that's been a cool progression in our practice.
That is outstanding. That is so cool to hear.
I love it.
That's awesome. I got to imagine when you have those kids in the room, the energy is just through the roof.
It is. They're excited. They love the experience. We show them how to move from the ground up again. Where us as adults, we should be exposed to that as well. But to get these kids that really adapt very quickly, it's awesome to see the changes and to really show that we can not only improve their performance but reduce their injury risk. And that's exciting for me to see kids evolve in that direction as well, not just us as adults.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's super, super critical right now, because one of the things that we're seeing trending is there's a greater incidence of injuries in high school athletes because more and more adolescents are becoming specialized at a younger age.
Right.
I don't know the numbers off the top of my head, but I do know that the statistics for like high school athletes getting, Tommy John surgery, for a baseball player is higher than it's ever been. I mean, that's pretty ridiculous.
It's not only ridiculous. Think about this. Dr. Andrews is one that made a quote talking about these kids. Not only these kids, these 12 to 17-year-old kids are choosing to have a Tommy John surgery before they even experience any symptomology. And they're doing that because they're recognizing that procedure potentially can give them better velocity moving forward. Forget about the integrity of the joint, right? Just doing something preventatively is just, it surprises me. Well, I guess it doesn't surprise me any longer since I've seen it so often. But we stand behind this idea of giving you integrity, giving you multitude of experience, not just in throwing a baseball, but rolling on the ground and crawling and having control of your body before you start to jettison a ball, 70 to 100 miles an hour. So it's just something that we had to stand behind. It's not everyone's first choice, because if you get a strength coach, as you could recognize, or a parent that thinks that their kid is going to a D1 program or further, and they said, I want my kid to throw up in a trash can and I want my kid to be faster by the time he gets out here. And then you see this kid that could barely, extend from their mid-back or extend from their hip, and that kid shouldn't be put into a speed and performance program. They should be retaught how to move again. And so that's a difficult conversation to have with people. But if we stand behind, what we believe in, I'm fine with treating those that really want to be there.
Yeah, that's awesome that you have that environment and that culture there. And that is a tough conversation because unfortunately, the society we live in with social media, everybody has the instant gratification. They don't want to wait. And, they are in a hurry to get from point A to B as quickly as possible.
Right.
And, you learn along the way. The journey is where all the learning happens. And they're so consumed with getting to the result because, the media and marketing, we see athletes making millions of dollars, and that is that's enticing. And it's, for lack of a better word, it's sexy. That's what they want.
Right. But I think, if you really come down to where the barrier is, it's really the adult, the one that is supposedly in charge. And it's the coach and parent that are trying to guide that child into something that they just don't have any background in. So this is where screening comes in. And I guess this could be a rabbit hole that we can run down. But when you screen someone and you're looking at their movement integrity, you have to come to a decision. What camp do you want to live in? Do you want to live in the Gray Cook camp and follow the FMS, or do you want to follow Gary Gray or Yonda? And I can go on. But ultimately is having a standard. And this is where one thing that I do believe in is having a standard operating procedure that everyone can relate to, regardless if you're in sports or not. And having the parent recognize that this is a standard that we would expect your child to have. And you document that. So the cool thing that we have now is we have these things, and we could document via phone now and show what they look like now versus what they look like 4 weeks from now, or comparing it to someone that is a good mover. So ultimately, this type of technology is what limits us having these really difficult conversations saying, this is our standard. this is where your kid is at, and we're going to meet the requirements before we put them into another environment that could potentially be dangerous, right? So that I love the conversations now because they become data driven versus emotionally driven, and now we have a different platform to have a conversation on. So they kind of sit back and they're like, oh well, data I get, especially if you have a techie or who are the ones that I worked with in the Silicon Valley. The ones that just love numbers, they love this type of program because there's really no argument to be had.
I love that. I love that quote. The data. That's huge. That's huge. Especially if you can show, on video. It's just, it's very clear, very transparent. It's like, wow, okay, that is something that needs to be worked on. Or look at the improvement they've had. They were moving like that. Like, right. Wow, okay.
Right. And you really don't have to, because you may already know this, but when you're looking at, you had Stu McGill on just recently, correct?
Yes. Yeah. So
yes.
You're following him up. Yes, you are. Yeah.
Yeah. So Stu and Gray Cook had a great debate, and it was respectful debate at Stanford a few years ago that I attended, and it was talking about the FMS scoring system. So a movement screening system that's popular. Does that score indicate a risk for future injury? And one camp would say, yeah, that's probably what we're getting from this type of data. And Stu, knowing who Stu is and knowing how he dives into research very, very well, he says, well, the evidence really isn't there yet. But what they came to an agreement on in respect to movement screening was that even though that the data can't be directly linked in correlation to a specific injury or possibility of future injury, that movement screening is still the best answer moving forward. And what we're going to do in the next 5 or 10 years is refine it, use technology to be able to objectify what we're seeing. And already there's some great systems out there, software systems that allow you to objectify, angles and, positions. And I'm a big planar type of guy that we can get into talking about different 3 planes of movement control. We can now document that. So if you can document it and you can show a start and then a finish, then you can have a great standard operating procedure for what you're going to try to accomplish.
That's very cool. I would love to hear about that software.
Oh gosh,
yeah.
I can go on and on. And so here's my my initial claim, or my initial statement, is that I'm not promoting anyone above the others. I'm just giving you my experience of what I've had great opportunity to work with. So there's a couple of companies out there that are all iOS or Android based, and one is called Posture Screen Mobile. Posture Screen Mobile it's a really cool integrated program that allows me to document both static position, and we can argue if that is valid or not, or if that really gives you a lot of information. But what it also allows you to do is take dynamic movement to be able to document that as well. And within the software, it objectifies what it finds. So if there's a head tilt or a rotation or a sagittal plane front to back discrepancy that you're picking out, and you could see it with your eye, but this software system allows you to objectify it and give you a number that you can use for future reference, right? So that system is nice and clean. It's done very, very easily. We use it with all of our athletes that come into our facility. But then lastly, this system is connected to a company called webexercises.com. It's integrated into the software. So if I say, yeah, you have a lack of mobility of your shoulder, you're limited in your control of your trunk, here's 2 or 3 exercises that you can implement into your movement prep before you do your conditioning, your official conditioning. So that's all integrated in there. And Web Exercises has well over 3,000 to 4,000 exercises that are just great to use. They're all populated within the software that you email to the client and or patient. So it's a nice, clean system all put together. But other ones that I've used, they've all been sued for some reason or another, but not for the reason you think. UberSense, that used to be called UberSense, got sued, and now they're called Huddle, HUDL.
Yeah, I use Huddle Technique. Yeah.
Right, so it used to be called UberSense, so someone sued them for that name, and now they changed their name. Another one was called Kinesio Capture. Now it's called Spark Motion. And that's a great one. Allows you to overlay, pre and post screening methods to actually show what types of deviations you have from the initial. That's a great one. Coach's Eye is a relatively popular one that a lot of people know about. And there's one more that I just became aware of called Kinetisense, Kinet Sense, I believe, but Kinetic Sense is something like that. But if you look those up, you'll find at least one of those will fit your needs, and they allow you to capture what you find with at least a somewhat of an objective eye, so then you could use that objectively on your follow-up to see, did you accomplish what you're looking to do.
Very cool. Very cool. Yeah, I'll have to check the other ones out. I've used Huddle Technique. I think that's a great app.
So do I.
Really cool to put side-by-side comparisons. For example, if somebody was I've used it if they're doing like a kettlebell swing, do a couple reps at the beginning of the training session, and then towards the end, and you can compare, or week to week or something. So they can see a clear difference, and you can compare those repetitions, so they see their form changing. Right,
and as you know it, as an athlete, to be able to visually see, if you're talking about cueing someone to help them move more effectively, the visual cue is very helpful. I'll talk about tactile cueing. I think that's another external cue that you can use to help someone move. But as an educator, something visual really makes a difference. So that you can say that you're flexing from your spine, or you have a butt wink that a lot of people like to use. But if you can show it in slow motion, show it side by side, what a great educational tool.
Yeah, that's so huge, because it just makes it so much simpler for them to understand the information that you're trying to communicate. And I think for a long time, and technology has helped out a huge part in that area, is it's bridging that gap. So like if you say to somebody, like butt wink or flexing, through your spine, they just look at you like you're speaking a different language. Like, what does that mean to me? I'm, layman's terms. What do I need to do?
Right. Yeah. And I think you and I, maybe I'll speak for myself. I get caught too much in my head. I start throwing out jargon that I expect that everyone should know, even my 90-year-old grandmother. So having a visual just to explain what a butt wink is, or lack of extension, or whatever you're trying to get at, is really valuable. And that I use that as another cueing method, another coaching method to get someone to move more authentically.
Yeah, absolutely. That's so huge. And, everybody learns different ways, kinesthetically, visually. Most people are not good auditory learners. They usually need to feel it, or they got to see it. So that's awesome. So what I'll do is I'll search for those, and I'll make sure I put those apps in the show notes.
Great.
Awesome. Great. Thanks for sharing those. So let's move into some of the other topics that you and I had down here. And so we actually kind of started talking to one another through Instagram. You posted some really cool videos. I don't even know like if you're creating them or it's a software or something, but basically they show either the fascial slings or subsystems in the body, and the skeleton will be moving through a specific type of movement pattern or motion, and I just think it's so cool because it just very clearly outlines what's going on in the body, and you don't have to know a damn thing about anatomy.
Right. I made those. I want to give myself some credit because it took me a long time to get those drafted. And let's kind of put some structure around what those videos were. So my handle on Instagram is FasciaDoc, and I'm a fascial geek. I'm just self-proclaimed. I've been to all but one of the fascial research congresses. There's been 4 so far. The first one was in Harvard, which I had to miss, unfortunately, but the last 3 I've been to, and this is just a collection of bunch of experts in this fascial field, really talking about this subsystem that you referred to, the system of how tissues connect to tissues within the body, both mechanically and neurologically, that we can talk about. But we're learning so much about this system just underneath our skin. that covers everything from our organs to our muscles to our nerves. And it creates what we used to think of it as a packaging system. It put compartments into, identifiable shapes. But what we're learning just in the last 5 to 7 years is that the system is so much more robust that it gives us a sense of where we are in space. It makes us more efficient. And so what I did with these videos is that I took some dissections that had been effectively done by a couple of experts in the fascial field. One I have to give credit to is Thomas Myers. If you haven't read the book Anatomy Trains and you're interested in a different perspective of how the body moves and how the brain governs the movement of the body, I highly recommend Anatomy Trains. And Tom gave me the ability to use some of his imagery in our education that we do with Rocktape, that I also use in these graphics. And the graphics just allow you, just like we spoke of just having a visual of what a very complex system and how to make sense of it, saying a fascial system that crosses your body from your right shoulder to your left hip, how this system works together to be able to help you rotate. So it can be someone throwing a ball to just someone that is simply walking or someone rolling out of bed. So these videos help people start the conversation of understanding of how the system works in respect to movement. So these videos have been dramatic of helping that. And then you got to start peeling away at the onion to kind of figure out that there's so many purposes and roles of this fascial system in respect to human movement. I'm still amazed every day I read it. I have in front of me before you came on, I'm reading another resource, which is Fascia. It's the Tensional Network of the Human Body, written by Robert Schleip, Thomas Finley, Leon Scheitau, and Peter Huijing. I probably butchered that last name, but the Tensional Network of the Human Body is my Bible right now, and I just can't get out of this book. And it's, I'm the weird one that labels everything and highlights probably an entire page, but I can't help it, right? It's just every paragraph is profound because it's a complete shift of what you and I learned as movement specialists 10, 15 years ago. Now we're looking at things with a completely different lens, and fascia is a component of this that we should know more of.
Yeah, so cool. Such an unbelievably interesting subject matter, within movement. Read the first edition of Anatomy Trains. I got to get the third one. But I love how Rocktape, which in case anybody doesn't know, Steve is the medical director for Rocktape, has integrated that into the coursework and in the manual. So it very well succinctly ties together the taping applications, but also presents this very congruent way of looking at the human body in movement. And so all of a sudden, you don't look at necessarily a sport, you look at what patterns or what movements that individual is doing inside of that sport. And then from there, you work backwards.
Right. I'm interesting enough. I'm and I'm not sure how this happened, but I launched Rocktape UK several years ago, and I got in front of the English cricket program. So if you follow cricket, which I don't, for one, is because they have tea breaks within the actual game itself. And some of these games could last 3 days long, and they could end in a tie. So that to me is not going to fly. But that being said, I had to learn what this sport was all about. And in particular was the bowler. And the bowler is equivalent to our American pitcher, if you will, in Major League Baseball. And so their mechanics of what they need to accomplish to jettison the ball towards the batsman, so it's different. They have a run up, and then they have more of an overhead type of release point, and they have different injuries that they experience, and they have different needs of their body. And so they asked me, they go, well, looking at that athlete and that activity or that movement, what would you do? And so I had to break it down. And so to your point is that this fascial understanding allows me to visually dissect anyone down into their parts. And the parts would be broken down to what is the run-up need? What is the planar needs of that body? What are the stability and mobility needs of those segments to be able to accomplish that? And then you move your way up the chain. But it allowed me to become the expert in bowling, I guess cricket bowling, I should specify, to be able to identify where we would potentially want to put tape on them to improve their performance and also reduce their injury risk. So this is where fascia really provides you with a different perspective, a different lens, like I said, to dissect any type of sport. I don't have much knowledge of water sports, but I could dissect any swimmer within minutes to be able to identify what that individual needs with this new knowledge.
Yeah, I love that. I love that because, again, it's just you're looking at the human body, and it's that lens that you're talking about. It strips away everything else, and it just sort of evens the playing field. And it's like, well, what do we all have in common? We're all human beings, so we all have a body, right? And we all have sort of some very overlap in terms of the movement patterns that we all have learned from the time we were a baby. Neurodevelopmental sequence. So I love the integration of that. I think it is very helpful in working with patients or athletes, and it works. I've had great results, and I know you have as well.
Yeah, and we can always be challenged in saying, well, the old school model of deadlifting a weight and cleaning it and pressing it overhead is gonna fly for most people, and I guess that model can't be argued because it has been tested for many, many decades. But here's what we're running into. We're running into very powerful athletes, very powerful and strong individuals that are still getting injured and getting injured at a higher rate. So all we're proposing, and I'm just going to save myself, but this fascial community, what we're proposing when it comes to Rocktape and utilizing tape, is to give people a different perspective. So you can implement, just like a periodization program where you would implement different phases of their training, we can't disregard how the brain governs our movement. The brain doesn't activate the glute medius by itself to stabilize the knee. So once we start to understand that, and understand that the brain typically wants to recruit multiple tissues and muscles to be able to make something more fluid and authentic, then the fascial system can fit into that schema better than having more of a muscular and a joint understanding. So what I'm saying is that this fascial system allows us with a different way to dissect someone, to be able to identify injury risks, and also to look for performance leaks as well, by having a better understanding of how tissues connect to tissues in a dissectable line, if you would want to call it that. And once you know these chains, then you can use them as part of your tool set to be able to say, I addressed your glute dysfunction and it didn't clear up what I wanted to in respect to my screen, going back to our screens, right? And so then having an understanding that the glute works in collaboration with the contralateral lat and biceps femoris, then we can say, okay, maybe I need to address them as a chain, or address them as a unit. And so that kind of gives people a different way to address things that they might get stuck on by looking at it myopically or looking at one specific muscle group.
I love it. It's awesome. So everybody needs to check this stuff out. I'll be sure to put it in the show notes. I'll also link to the videos on Instagram and stuff, because those are super helpful. And for anybody not interested in going our route and geeking out and reading, you can check out the videos, and that'll be your 15-second soundbite or video.
That's right.
Bite.
That's right. It's a good start, anyways.
For sure. So you touched on a couple big buzzwords in there. So let's kind of back up a little bit. And one of the other things that we wanted to talk about was mobility and motor control. So why? I guess one is let's define those terms, in the context of our conversation for this interview. And then two, let's talk about why mobility and motor control are important in terms of movement.
Okay, well, let's back up even from that. I totally agree with you that these need to be defined because there are different definitions. Let's poll 100 coaches, and I would even challenge you to do the same with your network. But I've done it. I've had the access of hundreds of coaches, and then so I poll the top, and I say, what do you look for when you're looking at an athlete? Forget about an athlete. When you're looking at someone move, what are the key things that you're looking for in that individual? And they consistently say they want someone that is elastic and they want someone that's springy. And so these are two terms that I keep hearing again and again. They want an elastic individual and they want a springy individual. And to me, that seemed to be competing terms. They said, well, you're asking for something that really doesn't exist. And they go, well, it does. You're looking for someone when if we really define what they were getting at as the elastic individual or someone that has elasticity is someone that has true mobility. And if we're talking about mobility or what the definitions are, say a dictionary definition, it would be the ability to move or to move freely. That's really what mobility is. So let's talk about that in respect to joints. Having the elasticity to be able to move effectively through the range of motion that's needed for that specific action. It could be throwing a ball. It could be, a swimming stroke, whatever that may be. Do you have the necessary mobility, also elasticity to be able to accomplish that task? The other thing that they wanted a springy athlete. And so what they meant by that, they wanted an athlete that had the elasticity and mobility within the joints, but not to be sloppy, meaning we don't want a yogi lifting 1,000-pound deadlift, right? They have plenty of mobility, but they don't have much control of that range of motion under load. So what they wanted is a blend of an individual that had enough elasticity to accomplish the task, but have control of that range of motion. And that's really what stability is control of it. And so that's mobility stability dilemma. Motor control is quite often misinterpreted as being stability, and motor control is not. If you look at the definition of motor control, I have it right in front of me. The systematic transmission of nerve impulses from the motor cortex, your brain, to the motor units, the tissues, the muscles, the movers. Go ahead.
Oh no, and just so they know, is that from the fascia book?
This is from the fascial book. Okay. So the systematic transmission of nerve impulses from the motor cortex to the motor unit, resulting in, this is the key part, coordinated contractions of muscles. So motor control is the fine-tuning knob. It really makes sure that you have appropriate timing and rhythm of contractions. Stability is your ability to resist the load and have control of the movement. And mobility is to have the appropriate range of motion within the joints. Does that make sense to you if I appropriately define those three?
For sure.
Okay,
for sure. Yeah. And I think that's very key there, because there is a difference. Like you said, they get lumped together, stability and motor control. And it's important to have that distinction, because the central nervous system does play a huge factor into how we move.
Yeah. And really how we use this mobility, stability, motor control schema is to be able to direct our intervention. And so my dogs are losing it in the background. I apologize.
It's all right.
So the mobility needs, we can say as a strength and conditioning specialist, we have plenty of tools to be able to assist someone to move more effectively. We have soft tissue manipulation that we can do through self-manipulation techniques, foam rolling, ball techniques, banded release techniques. Then you want to say, well, now we've improved your mobility. Next, we want to start to give you better timing and rhythm of these muscle contractions to be able to encourage the progression of that mobility gain. So then we could use plenty of reactive stability types of or reactive techniques to help encourage that. I would suggest that tape is a great tool in motor control. We tape the skin, it tells the brain where we are in space, and it starts to improve timing and rhythm, not necessarily stability. Stability can be built on through adding load and different environments. So this model of understanding mobility, motor control, and stability in that order gives me and gives our coaches at our facility at least a template to follow, saying, first, we want to make sure that they're elastic. Second, we want to make sure that they have coordination of that range of motion. And third, we're going to start to load it and make sure that it sticks. That's the model that we choose to use.
Awesome. And the Rocktape is great because, for those that don't know, so the largest organ in the human body is the skin.
Right.
All right. So the Rocktape has a tremendous effect when you place it on your skin. You're gonna ding me for this one. It's in the manual for the Rocktape FMT, but it has the amount of nerve cells in like 1 square centimeter of skin, and it's unbelievable the amount of feedback that you can generate, and that helps to promote a lot of the changes that lead to enhanced stability, and then further down the road as you're working up the progressions towards doing motor control.
Right. I try to make it easier for people to understand. And I don't want to liken us to a computer. I don't want to take a Newtonian model and apply it to the human body, but to get people to understand one of the main purposes of the skin is an organ of sense, and it allows us to communicate, allows us to better communicate with the brain. And if we can optimize that communication by putting shear on the skin with simply a strip of tape, I think it acts similar in a computer, not identical. I don't want people coming to attack me later saying, well, you're saying we're like a computer. I'm not saying that. I'm saying that the skin acts somewhat like a keyboard, right? So if we can feed in the letters that we want to develop words, the skin provides that information to the brain similar to a keyboard does to the hard drive. And what we're saying is that the tape on the skin improves our body map. That's a term that is becoming more popular, where we're feeding the brain's awareness of a specific area of the body that's now being taped. What that does is it improves timing and rhythm of the muscles that are in that region, because the brain has a better idea of where that tissue is now through the heightened awareness provided via the tape. And it becomes this, what I like to call an external cue. It helps to cue someone that doesn't really know where their lower back is or their hips are because they sit on their ass all day and they have what we like to call gluteal amnesia. If we can improve their awareness of where that body part is and feed the brain with information, it starts the process. It doesn't complete the process. It starts the process of giving us better awareness. Then it becomes our job to cue them through verbal instruction, visual instruction, and all the other tools that we have available. But tape is a great tool to kind of start it moving, right? Using that keyboard type of mentality.
Yeah, absolutely. It is a fantastic tool. Just for the reason you said there, it helps to promote greater awareness.
Yeah.
And sadly, that's one of the things that we brush up against so much nowadays, is because we move less and less, and we sit so much that we're completely out of tune with how we're moving and how we carry our body. And so that is a great tool to kind of like, hit the reset button a little bit.
Yeah. I love the reset button. I always talk about how tape is this tape. I've been raised with locking down tissues with cotton athletic tape my whole career. This tape doesn't do that. This tape is not a hardware system. It's more the software system. Going back to that computer analogy, is that we're just trying to provide better information for us to make the appropriate decisions. So it's more of a proactive way of correction versus saying, I'm going to lock you into extension, or I'm going to limit your knee from going into valgus or diving inwards. I don't want to stop something. I want to encourage you to resist that, if that's what we're looking for. So the tape, initially, this tape has been around 30 years. I want your listeners to know this, that the tape's been used for well over 30 years, primarily for pain mitigation and swelling control. Those are the two that it was really known for. But since the Olympics in 2008, and Carrie Walsh had it on her shoulder, and she's a 6'3", half-naked woman on a beach volleyball court, that it became much more interesting for people to start saying, well, I want to use that tape for this other reason. And the research is starting to complement that, saying, yes, we can use it more than just for pain mitigation and swelling control, but now we're using the tape to cue someone to move more effectively. And that's where it's getting exciting, is using this tape as a movement tool, not just a pain and swelling control tool.
Yeah, it's awesome. It's so much fun, and I think one of the greatest things about using it is is after putting on an application, the reaction that the person has, are like it's like a transformation in some
Right.
ways.
Right. And so it's somewhat of a parlor trick. I'm pulling from one of my colleagues, Dr. Andrea Spina, is from up in the northeast of Canada, and he talks about parlor tricks a lot, that you can cue something and you can start the process just by through intention. It's telling someone this is what's going to happen, and it can happen through this idea that we can produce an effect with these types of tricks. And I'm going to agree that tape is part of that tool set that we can trick the body. But our job, once we start improving motor control and communication to the brain, that we have to groove that pattern. We have to challenge that system. So it's not a panacea. It doesn't correct everything just by putting some tape on, even though you see some crazy changes immediately. If we don't add some significance to that, and when I say significance to that is we don't challenge that system, the body will never adapt. So just like stretching, we have to challenge it to be able to maintain new range of motion that we acquire through stretching protocols. Otherwise, the research shows they retract within 24 to 48 hours. So I want to make sure I'm clear when it comes to tape, great tool to start a process, but we want to combine that with corrective exercise strategies to get them to stick.
Awesome. Okay, so now that we went over mobility, stability, motor control, and we talked quite a bit about Rocktape and everything, let's kind of circle back a little bit there, and let's talk about one of the things that you and I wanted to discuss is sort of why motor control is sort of the main driver, if you will, rather than mobility, because we get very caught up in having greater range of motion and the ability to, move very freely and gracefully. Not that those things aren't important.
Yes.
But why is motor control sort of the one that in the long term is really going to dictate how much of that's going to happen?
It's a great question. And I do stand behind this because for decades, if not longer, we've tackled mobility. We've done everything and anything to improve our flexibility, improve the range of motion of our joints, and we have plenty of great tools to be able to do that. The problem is, why don't they stick? Why don't these types of programs create chronic changes? And that's a question that we should all be asking. Why do we have to foam roll every day to maintain the mobility of the ankle joint? Why do we have to see a chiropractor, me included? Why do we need to see a chiropractor to mobilize my SI joint or my thoracic spine on a continual basis? We have to start asking these hard questions. And the answer is, and I'm just going to say it in one word, is threat. I'm going to say that our brain is really governing threat and monitoring threat. So if it feels it doesn't have the control, the stability, if you want to call it that, to be able to put our foot on the ground without falling, it's going to accomplish what we're asking it to do, which is create some control somewhere. And the only way that it can do that is to upregulate the system and create a taut, restricted mobility, restricted range of motion, if you will. So let's take the hamstring as a great example.
Because this one is like always on social media with the toe touch. I mean, this is a great one.
Right. So if you have experienced and have been told that you had tight hamstrings your entire life, what's the number one thing that's recommended for you? You answer this. If you have tight hamstrings, what do they tell you to do?
You need to stretch.
Right. So stretching has been around forever. I probably have 20 in the back of my head right now that we can implement, and they all have been shown to have some specific effect. Acutely, we can show that we can improve your sit and reach just by applying a passive stretch, controlled contract relaxation stretch. So many different styles of lengthening that's out there. The problem is that they never last. So the individual says, well, I'm just going to give up on, I just have tight hamstrings. So you ask that same individual to start rolling the bottom of their foot. So you get a lacrosse ball, you put it down on the floor, you roll the bottom of your foot. I'm going to ask your listeners that have tight hamstrings to try this exercise. Is pre-screen, try to do a toe touch and measure how far you can get from the ground or from your toes. Then get a lacrosse ball, start rolling the bottom of your foot. You start to stimulate the skin. Let's start with that, like we had a discussion with. You start to stimulate receptors in that tissue. That information is sent to the brain. Your brain says, I'm getting better awareness of where my feet are through this exercise that you're taking me through. So this process starts to feed the somatosensory cortex of the brain. The brain starts saying, I'm getting a better picture of where my feet are. I'm getting better control of my feet. And then we remove the ball. We put ourselves in that same position that we just did for the toe touch. And we accomplish the same task. And typically, I'd say 95% of us are going to see at least a 2-inch change in your range of motion, not touching your hamstrings. So what I'm getting at here is that by feeding the brain with information, improving motor control through parlor tricks like rolling the bottom of your feet or putting some tape on a specific area of your body that feeds the brain will give you the length that you want, because now it doesn't feel as threatened by a toe touch, because it has more control of the movement via the intervention that we did. That in this case, a ball, it could be a piece of tape, it could be me rubbing their backside, right? So this is an opportunity, right? We've gained this new mobility through this parlor trick. Now, what do we need to do? We need to add some significance to it. We need to start training them in this new range of motion to give them confidence and control. So now the threat becomes lessened for this new range of motion. That's how, in my opinion and from my experience, we create more chronic changes.
Awesome. So 2 points to follow up on that.
Sure.
So correct me if I'm wrong. I think also when you're using the lacrosse ball on the bottom of the feet, we're releasing or loosening up the plantar fascia, which is part of the superficial back line for
Correct.
Thomas Myers. Okay,
Mm-hmm.
Cool. All right, that's a homework check for me.
Good.
And then 2 is, so what would be the sort of the next step, right? You said to add some significance to that, right? So they've done some release work there. They've gained an increased range of motion, right? And that's going back to the point you said is, okay, now how do we keep it?
Yeah. So how do we get things to stick is that we need to encourage the body that it can manage this new range of motion. And we do that through load. And what most people want to do is they add a lot of load. And if we bombard the brain with too much information too quickly, it doesn't adapt. If we follow this new understanding of how the brain rewires itself, this idea of neuroplasticity, we start to have a better understanding that less is more. And I like using this minimally effective dose when it comes to corrective exercises. Now, I want to make sure we differentiate that these are meant to be corrective to establish more control of this new range of motion. It's not meant to build your power capacity or your overall endurance. Those are things that can be trained through an appropriate strength and conditioning program. But if we want to start to create some significance of a new range of motion, less is more. I'm a big proponent of elastic therapeutic bands. I believe that you can train the brain very effectively with a low dose repetitive stress. And that's how the brain really likes to be fed. It likes to be fed with a mild stimulus repetitively, and it starts to rewire the brain in that way. And so I like to use techniques like if you follow the Palloff model. Palloff, those that don't know, is just in its simplicity of giving an elastic band and putting your body into different positions that challenge it in a specific plane of movement. So either rotational, frontal, side to side, or front to back and sagittal. You can use an elastic band to start to encourage control and stability in different positions that mimic human movement. So I love the Palloff system as a way to create significance. And the second one, which is less known by a lot of people, is the Brugger system, Brugger. Alois Brugger was a Swiss neuroscientist back in the 30s and 40s, I believe. And he developed this he developed the Berger postural relief position. That's what he's known for. It's a system that you can implement anyone from that sits in the classic texting position and do the complete opposite, is just roll the system back into the extension, external rotation, and supination posture. But what he's done also, what he provided us was an elastic therapeutic band exercise called the Berger band exercise that allows us to wrap the body very uniquely to be able to address all three planes of movement. So I use those two, Palloff and Berger's band exercises, to start to add significance to the mobility gains when I apply whatever parlor trick. A self-mobilization technique, a taping technique, all those work really well to start the process.
That's awesome. That's awesome. So again, I'll make sure I get links for those and put those in the show notes. We're definitely adding to that list for this interview, which is cool.
Great.
Very cool. But those are great exercises, great techniques to build upon. I use the Palloff press. Not familiar with the Berger, but after speaking with you, I'll definitely be checking it out for sure.
Please do.
Yeah. So that's awesome. Thank you so much for sharing. You've definitely given listeners some information and advice that they can implement and take action, which is always great to take away.
Great.
Okay. So, all right. So let's building upon that. We talked about the fascial system earlier, right? Let's dive a little bit deeper into how we're connected mechanically and neurologically.
Yeah, this is pretty deep. So
no.
you're not joking. Mechanically, it's easier for people to kind of grasp. Is that our muscles, as how we were taught, there was an origin and there was an insertion of where they attached onto the bone. They had an action and innervation from the nervous system. Too myopic in application to someone that's moving. The brain doesn't activate specific muscles uniquely to be able to move a specific joint. It moves tissues in a chain or in a sequence. So having an understanding of how these muscles connect the muscles in discernible chains gives you the understanding that tissues are connected mechanically. So the fascial system will connect the plantar fascia, going back to that chain we just discussed in respect to hamstring shortening, the plantar fascia to the Achilles, to the gastrocsoleus complex, the calf, all the way to the hamstrings, through the back of the hip, up the entire length of the spine, ending at your brow line. So wrapping your head all the way to the front of your head is what Thomas Myers would call the superficial back line. It is mechanically connected. He's shown this through dissection that all of those tissues are continuously connected via this system of connective tissue that connects tissues to tissues. So knowing that mechanical connection starts to give you I call it the GPS system, allows me to start navigating someone's body, saying, okay, you got tight hamstrings, you've been given hamstring stretches forever. You've addressed the hamstring tissue through self-mobilization techniques. Say you foam rolled them for the last 6 months. You've done everything locally. Having an understanding of how these tissues are connected mechanically starts to give you ability to navigate it a little bit further from the target, right? So from this case, I suggested that you roll the bottom of your feet or put some tape on the bottom of your feet to have an effect on this system. And in this case, we were talking about was the hamstring. So that's how they're connected mechanically. Through dissections, multiple people, including Thomas Myers, have shown that these tissues are connected together through fascia. Now, this fascial system not only is the connection, but it's also the sensory organ. So it's an organ of sense, not just an organ of form. And what I mean by that is that it's laced by even more keys, like a keyboard on your desk, than there are in the skin. So there's 9 times more sensory receptors in the fascial system than there are in the muscular system. So we used to think that we get information from our muscle spindles and Golgi receptors and our joint mechanoreceptors of where we are in space. What we're learning is that the fascial system that covers all of this and is more richly innervated by sensory receptors than anything, that this is the organ of sense. So once we know this, that it's now connected mechanically and now neurologically, and that we can tap into this system through touch, through training, through tape, this understanding allows us to refine our modalities. So I have implemented in our training with Rocktape what I call smart rolling. So rather than just mashing tissue like we're rolling pizza dough and just expecting something to happen, now I'm telling people, having an understanding that some receptors, if stimulated through fast release, can feed the brain to get it ready for activity, versus after activity, you want to speed up recovery. You can do a slow, deep technique to stimulate another set of receptors in the fascial system that actually encourage parasympathetic activity and recovery processes. This leads us to become smarter in our interventions versus just saying, well, you're doing squats today, roll out your quads. And I'm saying, no, roll out the tissues that are going to be involved with that movement, not just the quads. So fascia gives you a direction or a GPS to decide what's going to be working today. And then saying pre-activity, you're going to do this technique versus post-activity, you're going to do this. And this is all driven by our understanding of the neurological function of fascia. So to me, this is where the next wave is going, is knowing what these receptors are, Ruffini's versus Paccinia versus interstitial versus Golgi receptors. This is where the next wave of research is going to go, to be able to give us better discernible tools to be able to make some change in someone's movement capacity. So I get excited about fascia, so I apologize.
No apologies necessary. That's awesome stuff. Very, very cool.
Yeah.
That's awesome. Really, really interesting.
Did I dive deep enough?
No, that was great. I loved, actually, never heard that before. I love the approach of changing the speed, for foam rolling, doing it at the beginning of the session to stimulate a different response out of the mechanoreceptors, and then versus the end, we might be trying to help promote recovery.
Right.
That's great. Most people are, typically you see one type of approach, and it's usually we're just going to smash it.
Yeah, but we're getting better.
Yeah.
We're starting to recognize if dynamic warm-ups were better than what you and I were taught. Maybe I should speak for myself. What I was taught 20 years ago was, stretching is stretching. So passive stretching at the beginning is fine. And we recognize now that this dynamic process is much more indicated on our movement prep and pre-activity versus post-activity. So we're starting to better understand why that is now, not just because we're increasing the physiological effects on the system. We're actually neurologically priming the system to get ready for activity via this fascial system, which is, to me, revolutionary.
Yeah, and that's one of the key points that I think is the coolest is, again, it's by tapping into the fascial system, we're tapping into how we're going to move better through the central nervous system.
Yeah, absolutely. It's all about the brain. And I just posted something earlier today about how the brain governs pain, but the brain governs a lot of things. And we're still on just on the crux of understanding, but we're getting better, and we're starting to understand how the system is connected. So I'm excited. We're at the forefront of understanding, and I think by the time I die, we'll probably know 2% more, but that 2% is what I want to use to help those people I'm working with.
Yeah, it's very exciting time. It's cool. There's so much out there, and it's so interesting to learn, because you realize like how much there is in the human body. We just keep going deeper, It's
cool stuff.
It's very cool. Okay. So before we get into the rapid fire and stuff, we talked about ProjectMOVE. Do you want to talk about the Rocktape movement pyramid and then the movement summit?
Well, let's talk about the movement summit to begin with, because we'll talk a lot about that at the summit. So hopefully to entice people to come to the summit. Rocktape hosts a movement summit every year. And thankfully, they host it at ProjectMOVE in Denver, Colorado. That's where my facility is. And so we're moving into our fourth year this year. And I get to pull the who's who, and whoever I want to hear speak, I get to have a hand in getting them there. So I got lucky enough this year to get Michel Dalcourt, the the developer of the Viper, as well as the founder of Institute of Motion. Great mind and when it comes to movement and fascia. I'm going to have Eric Goodman, who's the author of Foundation Training. It's a revolutionary approach using the fascial system to be able to help people with chronic lower back pain and conditioning, right? He works with elite athletes all the way to weekend warriors and giving them pain relief as well as optimizing their efficiency. It's just a great system, the Foundation Training. We have Amos Randall, is a professional parkour athlete. He's going to show people how to fall. So it's called The Art to Falling. It is brilliant. I just never been told how to fall. And he shows us how to become more elastic. And just to my point earlier, how to become elastic in our fall and have control of that fall to be able to make it fluid. And what any parkour athlete does is they make things that should be really damaging very fluid. So it's cool to have someone like that speaking at it. We have the WOD doc, which is Dr. Tim Szymanski. Tim is highly involved in the CrossFit community, and what he's doing is really groundbreaking, in my opinion. He kind of followed the lead of what Kelly Starrett did with Mobility WOD, but what Tim is doing is he's trying to feed good information to the CrossFit community to limit injury risk that we're noticing in that community. So he's a great mind as well. I'll be the low man on the totem pole at that conference, and I'll be talking about the movement requirements and kind of setting the stage for these guys to just kill the show. So I really would welcome any of your followers to come June 4th and 5th in Denver, Colorado. On the Rocktape website, you'll see a link for registration.
Yeah, and I'll be sure to include that in the show notes as well. But that sounds like a all-star lineup. That's very exciting.
It's a fun weekend. If you're into movement, you need to be at this. I get the benefit of sharing these minds with our community, but it's 150 people, not just sitting and watching someone talk to a screen. We're moving it and we're living it. So I have a huge facility to have people explore movement, and we'll roll, crawl, grunt, and breathe the entire weekend. It's just a cool weekend of learning.
See, I think that's one of the coolest things because it's called the Movement Summit. So not only do you get to listen and have these like awesome speakers and lectures and stuff, but then you're in this environment where you actually facilitate and encourage to get up and like, let's put it into play. Let's try it.
Yeah, there aren't any chairs at this summit, so recognize that.
That's awesome. That's awesome. Very cool. Very cool. Did you want to talk about the movement pyramid, or are you good with just the summit?
No, the summit will fill in all the blanks.
Okay, cool. All right, so I wrap up each guest. I ask them some rapid fire questions. These are fun. These are cool.
I'm ready.
So here we go. First one. Okay. Given your current knowledge level and your experience, if you could go back in time, what advice would you give yourself 10 years ago?
Oh, follow the same path. Do more to fail than to succeed. Because what I've learned in my experience, and it's through unexpected failures. I didn't plan this process, but if I did this again, I would probably follow the same pathway because the failures showed me everything. My successes are great to accomplish, but failures is where I actually learned. So learn to fail.
I love it. What's your favorite strength training exercise?
Oh, loaded carries. I'm a Dan John's disciple. So if you're a Dan John disciple, loaded carries do everything. I love loaded carries. There's so many variations to it. So don't think I'm just carrying suitcases in the airport. It is an eclectic program, so simplistic, but freaking hard.
Yep. And you get a lot of bang for your buck and you get strong.
That's right.
I love it.
Yeah.
How's your training changed today compared to 10 years ago?
Oh, it's a different world. I was a strength and I was a freak of nature. I could lift heavy things and I was good at it. Now I'm an Indian club swinger and mace bell. I'm a crawler. I roll. It's such an evolution in my movement repertoire from lifting a bar, which I still love to do, but the majority of my training is moving smaller implements and being more intricate in my movement capacity.
That's awesome, man. That's
Indian clubs. I can't say them enough.
Yeah, well, I used one of the photos you sent me was you swinging some clubs, which is
That's
cool
right.
because I swing the clubs as well. So trying to get deeper and deeper in them, there's so much fun. It's it's definitely a lifetime journey with those for sure.
Sure is.
Okay, have you ever had an injury, and if so, how did that affect your training?
Oh, great question. I don't have an ACL on either knee. Ruptured them one 13, 14 years ago, the other one 2 or 3 years ago. Doing things that I love, playing ice hockey and lacrosse. So I did them for good reason, and I never had them repaired. And it's changed me both psychologically as well as physically, meaning that I had to restructure what my capacity was without ACL, which has been amazing experience. So those are the main injuries that I've experienced are knees, and it just changed my perception of what human movement requirements are. And it's been a cool experience to go through. Wow.
Can you, just out of curiosity, can you still go through like, full range of motion and squat and everything? And is that painful or?
No, none of it is. I'm what's considered a coper. If you follow the knee ACL reconstruction community and research, there's copers versus non-copers. And copers are those that ruptured their ACL, but there's no laxity within the joint. So I don't have any true hypermobility in the joint that's going to lead to future injury. So they're monitoring me for the rest of my life, but they're planning on a 20-year follow-up of looking at how my knee degenerates versus someone that's been reconstructed. That's this model of copers versus non-copers. So I don't have any laxity in my joints. I don't have any range of motion restriction. And so what my job was and what I really stood behind was, since I don't have this ligament that supposedly controls my tib in relationship to my femur, now my nervous system had to come online. And that's what a coper really is considered, as someone that has had an injury. Your nervous system recognizes and it compensates effectively enough to be able to manage it. So my job is to manage this and maintain this through my stability training. That's one of the major reasons why I changed my focus from a more uniplanar environment where I was just lifting heavy things like a deadlift to becoming more of an eclectic triplanar athlete where I expose my knee to all three planes of movement in all different ranges in all different environments. So technically I shouldn't be able to ski the Rockies like I do every weekend, but because I've fed my brain with information, and this is my interpretation, but that I fed my brain with that environment and that type of skill set, that I can ski and do things that usually people without an ACL can't do.
Wow. That's incredible. Really cool. Really
Love
cool.
It.
That's awesome. Definitely keep me posted on that. That's interesting.
I will. Hopefully good news.
Yeah, for sure. No, for sure. Good news. Okay. What's one thing high school athletes should be doing more of to improve their health and training?
Breathing. I don't even have to pause on that one. If we wait till we're deep into our adulthood and breathe like 95% of us do, which is apically or chest breathe, we'll never tap into the magnificence of the diaphragm. So if you follow Perry Nicholson, which I know you do, and the dynamic neuromuscular stabilization, the Postural Restoration Institute, all these camps that are talking about breath first, it's the first movement that we accomplish when we come out of the womb that we need to have control of and that none of us really do. So it's breathing. So if we can get breath control, start to stabilize the roof of the core and build, from that, I think that's the number one thing that I would start with. Not an easy answer.
No. I love it. That's awesome.
Yeah.
What's your best tip to improve recovery from a training session?
Nutrition. Actually, I'll be a twofold answer: nutrition and breathing. Two relatively free things. So I'm going to add another one. I apologize, but it's going to be water, which is free, breathing, which is free, and then good nutrition, which is probably going to cost you something, but minimal in comparison to having poor recovery. So those are the three that I really stand behind when it comes to recovery: breathing, water, and good nutrition.
Simple, and just do them at a high quality level. I love it.
That's right. That's right.
What is one book that everyone should read?
One is going to be Robert Schleip's Fascia, the Tensional Network of the Human Body. If you want a different perspective of how the body moves, both neurologically and mechanically. And the second one would be Can You Go from Dan John. Simple as it can be. Can you go? I love Dan John. I have a man crush on that guy. I just love his approach. It's just so simplistic. If you ever get a chance to talk to him, he's so down to earth, and he says, "This is my experience. I'm going to share with you what I've learned." And what he's learned is the top level of athletes really need simplistic patterning, and he's got a group of 5 movements that he challenges people to do, and he gets great outcomes. I'm a big believer of Dan John. Can you go?
Awesome. Steve, this has been an absolute blast, man. I've had so much fun talking to you over the last hour and change. It's been great. I definitely think we've provided a ton of knowledge bombs and lit some dendrites on fire tonight. So it's been a pleasure. So thank you very much for coming on and sharing. So just hang on the line. Let me give you a proper goodbye and we'll wrap up.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks for tuning in to the Leo Training Podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, please take a moment to drop a review into iTunes. And be sure to tune in next week. I will be doing a special broadcast and releasing 3 episodes following Mother's Day.
Thanks for listening to the Leo Training Podcast. Subscribe and get even more expert training tips at www.leotraining.io.